Welcome, Moby. This is the first of two interviews that you'll be having. I'm Peter Mandler. I'm an historian of modern Britain. My colleague here, Sujit Sivasundaram, is an historian of the Indian and Pacific Oceans in the 18th and 19th centuries. And you'll be having another interview later with two of our colleagues, Melissa Calarezu and Bronwyn Everall, and they'll introduce themselves then. I just want to say at the outset that this that interview is not a test. You've been tested to death. If you already passed all your tests with flying colors, you wouldn't be here. So we're not wanting to put you through further hoops to determine your intelligence or aptitude. Really, this is just an attempt to see how you get on with the very unusual kind of teaching that we offer here, supervision, where actually it's in history, it's almost always one-on-one. You and me sitting down for an hour talking about an essay. So this is a kind of dry run for that, okay? So we've looked through your personal statement and picked out some things to talk about on that basis. And Sujit, I think, is going to kick off.
Hi, Moby. So I enjoyed reading the personal statement. And one thing that jumps out of the personal statement is that you're interested in the Ottoman Empire, and that you completed your EPQ on the factors leading to the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So I just thought I could ask you, just very simply first, why you're interested in the Ottoman Empire?
Well, I think that discussions of kind of the world wars, well, First World War, it's mainly seen through a lens of fighting Germany. So the main focus of history, when you look at the World War I, is mainly kind of Central Europe and surrounding things. And I think that the study of the Ottoman Empire, for me, I became interested in it because I read Eugene Rogan's work on the Ottomans in World War I, and I thought that it provided kind of a different light because without kind of considering the Ottoman dimension, you forget the kind of competing desires of France, Britain in the Middle East, and how they've kind of got a double focus. They need to not only defeat Germany, but they also need to kind of pacify the Middle East and then eventually get their claims through the Sykes-Picot informal kind of agreement. So I think that looking at the Ottoman Empire provides a different lens, something that's often forgotten when looking at normal history in school.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, of course, because it opens up this new way of thinking about World War. But one of the things you mentioned in your personal statement is that you're also interested in the 17th century history of the Ottoman Empire. And presumably what's interesting about the Ottoman Empire is that it's this empire that just lasts and lasts into the modern era. So do you think that it was out of date by the early 20th century, that it didn't fit the world stage, that it had gone into decline effectively? Would that be a way to see it?
Well, I think that can be viewed in different ways. So you could see it as kind of a 21st century person looking in. So I guess comparing, so you can see in Britain, for example, democracy had been developing for about a century or more, and there were established political parties. And I think that there was kind of a sense in places like Britain and France that they were more progressed. So France had their revolutions, and they'd got rid of the old kind of tyrannical ruling, and it was claimed to be rule for the people, whereas the Ottoman Empire was kind of on the periphery of Europe. It didn't really fit in that it was still imperial, even though, of course, Britain and France and Germany, they were still empires. But I think that, the way in which the Ottoman Empire was ruled, it could be used kind of as propaganda, I guess, and that Britain and France needing to bring forward the Middle East into kind of the ideals of democracy.
Yeah, just to clarify then, are you saying that the perception of the Ottoman Empire is a sort of propaganda tool, and so it isn't different, and so it's in keeping with European political structures, or that there is an essential difference between the Ottoman Empire and, say, Western Europe by the early 20th century?
Well, I think that there are definitely very real differences because of how Britain, for example, while it has its colonies, it's localized into a very small island. So it's the forms of ruling are much more centralized, i.e., like the kind of periphery and the core is much different to the Ottoman Empire, which was very expansive, and it wasn't as if it wasn't like split around the globe. But I think that, I do think that in large part it was ideas of kind of British or French superiority, and it's also true to say about the religious element, because Islam and Christianity, they've been seen as long-term opposition throughout pretty much all of the Ottoman Empire's existence. And I think so these ideas of kind of barbarism in some ways could amplify perceived differences. So while the Ottoman Empire may have been fairly similar in some ways, the perception, I think, did exaggerate it.
Yeah, and that's really helpful. I mean, centralization versus decentralization is one way to think about it, and certainly the religious differences. But of course, the Ottoman Empire wasn't only Islamic; it had many religions within it as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, actually, can I just pitch in something here? I mean, so far we've been this is relevant to that last point. So far we've been talking about the Ottoman Empire's interface with European powers. Because obviously, this is how you got interested in it through Eugene Rogan's book and the question of the First World War. But if you go back to this earlier period that Sujit was alluding to, I mean, how does the Ottoman Empire look differently if you think of it not in relation to Europe, but in relation to Africa and Asia?
Well, I suppose in that case, kind of the Ottoman Empire in relation to kind of Africa and Asia, in some ways, could be seen as a more modern kind of like state, because of the way there was these long distance trade routes with the Silk Road, and on kind of a scale that hadn't really been seen before in many other areas. Whereas in I don't really know very much about Africa this time, but I think that
actually that's an advantage. That is, we want to just have a go,
Yeah, but I think that the trade routes and especially sub-Saharan Africa are much more localized, whereas the Ottoman Empire, not only did it stretch territorially in very expensive terms, but its economic reach was huge, and in some ways could be seen as kind of like a precursor to more modern liberal economy.
And do you know what its relation to Islam was? I mean, Islam is obviously a religion that is dominant across Northern Africa and much of South Asia and the Indian Ocean world. So what role does the Ottoman Empire play in relating to Muslims in other parts outside of its territories?
Well, it's got the key religious sites of Mecca, Jerusalem, etc. And so you've got all these many people from hugely various different areas coming into the Ottoman Empire, bringing in luxuries, their knowledge, because sometimes they may have settled. And so in a way, it's kind of like internationalism in some ways.
Yeah. Do you know anything about the rise of nationalism in the early 20th century? Because you read Eugene Rogan's book.
Yeah. I guess part of the reason why Britain and France could legitimize their kind of like breakup of like their divisions of the Ottoman Empire in World War I was because of I guess Wilsonian ideas of national self-determination. So you could see in like the Balkan Wars, it was kind of painted as this like heroic struggle against this tyranny of imperialism, just the little guy fighting against the big kind of monolith. and so Britain and France could use, whether they were real or not, they could use these kind of nationalist feelings as
well, yeah, just to interrupt, I actually meant nationalism within the Ottoman world.
Yeah.
The Young Turk movement and so on. So, and this probably relates to the point that Peter just asked you, actually, because is there a way in which we can conceive of the Ottoman world as a center of nationalism, and does its nationalism connect up with nationalism in Asia and Africa more broadly, especially Asia in this period?
Well, I suppose it is difficult because there's a lot of kind of attention on nationalism rising in the kind of 18th, 19th centuries. And in a way, this kind of ignores how there were lots of different groups within the Ottoman Empire before this, which the kind of, I guess, what I gather, the historiographical assumption is that these kind of groups, they were just all kind of harmonious in a way, and then they just all appeared in the outburst as if it's, you know, which I don't think is really very accurate. I think that there was kind of a sense of unity which was fostered by Islam, but you have to kind of look at the Ottoman Empire, not so, like, you need to look at it as a whole, but you also need to look at it in the localities, and you could maybe see different practices, different kind of structures of governance in these local regions.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, just out of interest, you know, is that the fall of the Ottoman Empire is taken up as a cause for nationalism in the wider Asian world. But that's something you can look at later in your study.
Should we switch gears a little bit? Let me just ask you a question, not drawing on your personal statement, but just exploring a little bit more about your intellectual world, your intellectual life. Tell us something about what you like to read for pleasure. That is nothing to do with history or your course, but, you know, just for you. Train journey, which you don't during the pandemic, but if you,
I haven't been on any train journeys, so. Well, I do like to kind of. There's only so much limited time in the day, so rather than reading kind of books, I tend to read quite a lot of like articles, like news. Like I enjoy following politics, just because I think it's so relevant to everyone's daily life. So yeah, I did used to enjoy reading, you know, more creative books. But,
did you have a favorite novel that you recommended all your friends to read?
Well, no, because I just think that so many books, they have so many different kind of great points. So, like, for example, I really enjoyed Animal Farm when I read that, because that linked it felt so connected in it to when I was doing Russian Revolution for A-level, and seeing kind of a different lens through which, so, you know, animals, and seeing how this kind of affects the perception of revolution.
Apart from the sort of parable aspect of Animal Farm, is there anything that particular reimagination of contemporary political struggles tells us that we wouldn't get from other kinds of sources? I mean, it might tell us something, you know, about Orwell and his audience, and rather than about the Soviet Union.
Yeah, well, yeah. I suppose it shows kind of an external view, looking in, and this would be very different to more kind of pro-Soviet historiography and literature, and it's interesting kind of to see kind of like, for example, Solzhenitsyn looking at like kind of defectors and people who have become disillusioned with the Soviet Union, looking at how this in some ways ties in or is different to Western views of the Soviet Union because of how closed it was. It was very difficult to kind of find out what it really was behind the kind of propaganda cloud.
That's a really good parallel, because I mean, in some ways, you could see Orwell himself as a kind of defector. I mean, someone who may have entertained illusions about communism.
Yeah,
he encountered it in Catalonia in the Spanish Civil War. Sujit, do you want to show your
off the wall question? What's going on with the animals there, and how does so
Sujit likes animals?
Yeah, so I have to ask about animals. Well, I suppose, how does the depiction of animals and the theorizing of animals in that novel fit with the period in which it was written, do you think? And would it be written differently if there was a book on animals today?
Well, I suppose in a way it can kind of put more distance between the reader and the actual event, so it's not so kind of blatantly anti-Soviet Union in some ways, because, for example, I might be misremembering, but I think it's possible that the Soviet Union could see, because of the way in which it wasn't like depicting the real, actual humans, Soviet Union could in some ways use it as a, I guess, critique of capitalism, and so so you can kind of see in some ways what you want to see.
Why does he use horses, cows, and pigs rather than dogs and cats?
Well, horses, cows, and pigs, they're much more about serving animals, whereas cats and dogs, they've got much more of a equal relationship with humans, and it's kind of these horses, cows, and pigs, they're being used by this kind of wrong ideas of communism and revolution feeling.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the farm had a lot more cultural resonance then than it did now.
Yeah.
Did you want to show your
Yes, I will,
image?
yeah. So I'm going to screen share an image, Moby, and it's not related to anything probably that you've come across at school. So it's not, and there's no right answer to this question at all. I'm just interested to see how you respond to it as a historical source. So I'm just going to screen share now the image, which everyone should hopefully see. And there it is. I'm going to tell you just 3 basic things about it. It's from 1903, so it's early 20th century. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it's from the Caribbean. And what was the third thing? It's a context of labor is the third thing. So it's a context of labor, it's from the Caribbean, and it's the early 20th century. So just take 2 seconds to look at it and tell me, as I say, there's no right answer, how you might interpret it as a historical source.
Well, my first thought is that it can kind of show maybe social customs there. So you can see scattered about. You've got the plate and the bowl. You've got shisha pipe. Is that it? I don't know. But you've got the musicians, and you've got the dancers who are with the pink. They're very kind of the star of the show, really. Everyone looks kind of enraptured, staring at them. So it's possible maybe this is kind of could be like a special event in their lives, like an anniversary, or just a general kind of get together. Their clothes all look very very clean, and so that kind of makes me think it's a bit more special in some ways.
So how does it change the view one would think about labor and coarse labor in the Caribbean to look at an image like this?
Well, in some ways it could kind of, well, they're all non-white, and so
what is their ethnicity?
So it's the early 20th century. That's the clue.
Well, would they be slaves?
So it's after the age of slavery, early 20th century, but it's the context of South Asian indenture.
Yeah, you identified the shisha pipe, so that should have told you, or something similar to it.
Or are they more kind of like the kind of landed gentry?
No, that's from South Asia. So after the end of slavery,
Yeah.
Or after the end of slavery, because it didn't end abruptly, South Asian laborers were taken to the Caribbean to work on farms.
Okay.
So this is South Asian labor. But I mean, how do you think I mean, the fact that it's, you know, entertainment like this, how does it change the way we think about labor?
Well, I suppose kind of the dominant perception of this kind of somewhat forced, I guess, like colonial project is more about hardship and suffering, and so you can kind of forget how there are kind of continuation of very real needs of human interaction during this, and so this can kind of suggest that just by looking at this, it would suggest that it was a very kind of free system of labor, like they were allowed to do what they wanted.
I mean, not necessarily, but I think it kind of, because of course there's coercion in it, but I think
but just kind of
I suppose historians of labor would say that it's important to bring images like this in to show that it's that coarse laborers have lives beyond the context of plantation. Do you think that?
Also, I am quite interested in the kind of the backdrop. It looks very kind of idyllic. So I don't know who depicted this, but
what do you think? Why is it idyllic?
Well, I would imagine that this is probably something that was sent back to the kind of the Europeans possibly to show kind of a paradise. Like, for example, like depictions of North America just as soon as people arrived. A lot of them were about how it was this bountiful area.
So it's in a book, and it's connected to this. Chocolate. It's cocoa plantations. And chocolate making. So I mean, well, not. I mean, so do you think there is a link to our consumption practices from this image? Does it lead into our everyday lives today still, this image?
Well, I suppose it'd be interesting to see how kind of social customs and are different or still continuation in regions like this. Like the as I was saying about how the clothes look very opulent. Whether now it's still the same.
But there's also the tropical origins of a lot of our luxury commodities, which causes us to want to romanticize them as well.
And just a final question: is there an argument about gender to be made from this image?
Well, you have the kind of, it's the man who holds the kind of symbol of masculinity, the weapon, whereas the women, they're kind of it's about dancing, another kind of stereotypical.
Exactly, and it probably even goes back to the Ottoman world. The idea of the dancing.
That's probably a horn rather than a pipe, isn't it, in the foreground?
Yes, I think so. I think you were right to say that it might be an anniversary or special celebration, by the way, but that's my guess. Over to Peter to close.
No, I think that's it. Thanks very much. I mean, I hope you haven't. Hope you found this enjoyable. I mean,
thank you.
To see the best of you, you know, Mo. And as I said, it's not a test. It's an attempt to just to get to know you a little better. So we've really enjoyed meeting you, and you've got, as I say, one more interview, and you know how to get there.
Yeah.
Okie doke. Nice to meet you. See you soon.
Bye.
Good to meet you, Moby.